International, www.netivyahinternational.org.
Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam. These portions of the Torah that contain 2, 3, 4 chapters of reading are so rich. The book of Genesis is one of the richest books of the whole Bible, and one of the most important books of the whole Bible, because it gives us foundation for everything, from the creation of the world to the relationship of God with his children, with all of humanity, but specifically with the choice that he made of Abraham. And so we are still continuing a second session for the portion of the Torah that's called the life of Sarah, Chayei Sarah, that starts in Genesis 23 verse 1, ends in Genesis 25 verse 18 with the death and the burial of Abraham. But I only covered chapter 23, so I want to cover the rest of this week's portion, the life of Sarah, that starts in Genesis 23:1 and ends in Genesis 25:18. And I want to go to the second important text of this portion of the Torah, and that is Abraham's biggest worry. He waited for decades, literally for decades, for God to fulfill his promise, and he waited till Sarah was 90 years old. And he was 100 years old when God finally kept his promise and gave Abraham a seed from Sarah, Isaac. Sarah laughed. In Yitzchak in Hebrew means to laugh. Sarah laughed when she heard the angel say, "Oh, you will have a child." She said, "I am already finished my career as a woman that can bear children, and you're telling me that I will have a child?" She laughed. She had doubts. It was funny for her that she, at the age of 90, will have a child. But she does. Isaac is born. Isaac is born, and he's 40 years old, still not married. In the ancient world, that was very strange. Now, why was he not married? In the former portion, not in Chayei Sarah, in Vayera, we find out that Sarah wants to kick out Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar was her handmaid for years. She gave Hagar to Abraham to have a son, and Ishmael is born from Abraham and Hagar. And now Sarah has a son, her own son, and she wants Hagar and Ishmael to be kicked out. And she tells Abraham, Abraham says, no way. And then God intervenes. I like that very much. And says, Abraham, listen to your wife Sarah. Kick out Hagar and Ishmael. And the question is, why did Sarah want? She wasn't the mean woman. Why did she want to kick out Ishmael? Because she saw Ishmael playing around with Isaac. That's in last week's portion. And so they are concerned, Sarah is concerned for the development of Isaac as a man, because this phrase, playing around with, is a sexual phrase. Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph with playing around, the same word, letzachek, the same root as Isaac, letzachek. So Ishmael was metzachek with Isaac, played around with Isaac. Sarah sees it, and she says, no, this boy, Ishmael and his mother are getting out of here. We don't want them around here. But now we are in the next portion in Chayei Sarah, and we find out in chapter 24 that Abraham is very worried. Before he was worried that he doesn't have a son. Now he's worried he has a son, but his son is still not married at the age of 40. So he says, you know what, we sent Jacob to Laban, to Assyria, to the north, to Haran, to bring a wife for Isaac. We sent Isaac there. Let's bring a wife from there, from our family up north, for Isaac also. So he gives instruction to his old servant, and he loads him up with camels, with goods, with cloth from Egypt, with gold, with silver, with bracelets. We hear about this in chapter 24. And this camel caravan with this old man Eliezer go up north to find a bride for Isaac. And old wise man Eliezer devises a test. He says, if I meet any girl, I'm going to test her to see what quality she is. So he goes to the well where the shepherd girls come with the flocks. And he sees this beautiful girl. He doesn't know yet who she is. And he says, young lady, let me drink. And in his mind, the test was, if she says, I will draw water for you to drink from the well, but I will also draw water for your caravan, for your camels, this would be the right girl. It shows that she's thinking, that she's considerate, that she cares about people, and she cares about the animals, and she's a shepherd girl, a working girl. That's the kind of wife I want for Isaac. And she's very young. So he gets to the well outside of Haran, and he sees this beautiful girl. It says like that, verse 16 of chapter 24. Now the young woman was very beautiful to behold, a virgin. No man had known her. And she went down to the well, filled her pitcher, water that means, and came up. And the servant ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your pitcher. And she said, drink, my lord. Then she quickly let her pitcher down to her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also, until they had finished drinking. Wow! I had that test, and this girl passed the test. Wow! The first girl he meets. But it also happens to be that she's family. She's from Sarah's family. She's a granddaughter of Laban, the brother of Sarah. So she gives drink to the camel, and when they finish drinking, the old man takes out a golden nose ring, weighing half a shekel. Half a shekel would be, I would guess, like half an ounce. Maybe more, maybe an ounce. of pure gold. And he says, whose daughter are you? And she tells him. And she invites him to her father's house to lodge. And the old servant of Abraham goes there and he negotiates for Rebekah. And the negotiation goes on, and Laban is not going to let him go with Rebekah until he gets all the gold and all the gifts and all the silver and all the wealth that Eliezer brings with him as a dowry. Laban wants to get it, so he's holding the old man up. And then in verse 49 of chapter 24, we read the following text. Verse 49 of chapter 24 of Genesis. Now, the old man is getting worried, and is being delayed. He wants to take Rebekah back to the land of Canaan, to the house of Isaac, who is now the boss. Abraham died, his mother died, Sarah died. He's the big boss. He's 40 years old, unmarried. Very worrisome situation in the Middle East now, and then even more in the biblical time. And this is what Eliezer says to Laban. Now, if you will deal with me kindly and truly, and deal with my master kindly and truly, tell me. If not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left hand, that I want to go somewhere else, find somebody else. If you are fooling around, playing with me, and delaying me, and delaying me, and delaying me, and you're not letting me take the girl to the land of Canaan to marry Isaac, then let me know. But the phrase that is using here in the English, deal with me kindly and truly, with my master and with me. Now this phrase in the Hebrew text is chesed ve'emet. Translated normally grace and truth. But in the Hebrew Bible, the phrase, exact phrase, grace and truth, appears at least 20 times. In the Psalms and in the historical writings and in the Proverbs, and appears at least 20 times. This is actually the first time that it appears in the Bible in our portion, Chayei Sarah, chapter 24, verse 49. Why is this so important, folks? It's so important because we have this text that is totally misunderstood by Christians, and the text appears in the Gospel of John, chapter 1. It appears in verse 17. Grace and truth. Charis kaiatia in Greek. And in the Hebrew it appears 20 times in the Old Testament. But never in the English King James, and I don't know about the Koreans. I apologize for my Korean brothers and sisters. I don't read Korean. It never appears in the Old Testament the exact same way, same translation as in John chapter 1 verse 17. And why? The text says like this in chapter 1, John 1:17. The law was given through Moses, and grace and truth came from Jesus Christ. That's verse 17 of John chapter 1. So the Christian translators were thinking, how could grace and truth exist in the Old Testament 20 times, in the Torah several times, when grace and truth came from Jesus Christ? And so before Jesus Christ, there cannot be any grace and truth in the Old Testament. But there is. Chesed ve'emet, there is. But already in the Septuagint, that is a pre-Christian translation to Greek, already then they played with the translation. Either then or sometimes in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century AD. And the Hebrew is still the Hebrew. They couldn't play with the Hebrew. The Hebrew was in the hands of the Jews, not in the hands of the Christians. So what do? What does it mean? Grace and truth came from, not through, like the law came from, through Moses. It wasn't his. He was an agent of the law. But grace and truth, the source of grace and truth came from Jesus Christ. That's what John tells us. But what is grace and truth doing here? Grace and truth means if you deal with me graciously and fairly, truthfully, then let me know. And in Psalms, it appears in several messianic Psalms as well. Maybe one place in some of the modern English translations, they kept it in one place, a messianic Psalm. But grace and truth are two conflicting elements. If I go to the market now over here in Machne Yehuda in Jerusalem, and I want to buy a kilo of walnuts, and I pay for a kilo, and I get a kilo. That's true. That's true weight and fair dealing. However, if the merchant likes me, and he puts in the bag not 1 kilo, I pay for 1 kilo, but he gives me 1 kilo 100 grams bonus, that's grace. You can't have grace and truth coexisting at the same time, on the same occasion, except in Jesus Christ. Because in Him, God's grace and God's truth are embedded in His pre-existence to the creation of the world. They are embedded in God's program for redemption of mankind. They're embedded in the character and in the mission of the Messiah that comes to fulfill our lack, our shortcoming by His grace, and therefore pays the full price for our redemption as human beings. It's a big topic. I don't want to carry on this topic. Maybe I'll give a lesson on another occasion in Brad TV dealing with this issue. But for now, read the Word of God. Every week we tell you what will be read in every synagogue, and read the Word of God. The next portion starts actually in chapter 25 of Genesis, verse 19. And again, it's a very, very important portion, and it's called Toldot, the history, the genealogy of Isaac, or the history of events with Isaac. Starts in chapter 25, verse 18. I suggest that you read from chapter 23, verse 1, and finish at chapter 25, verse 18. And keep up this way. You will read most of the Bible during the year. God bless all of you, and bless Brad TV for broadcasting these teachings from Jerusalem. God bless you. Shalom.
Netivyah International, www.netivyahinternational.org.